Just 2 weeks after Townsville, Supercars are back in action this weekend for the only night race of this year's championship. As always, I'm here to tell you everything you need to know, but I am a little under the weather at the moment, so I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. And with that in mind, let's jump into the preview. Our battleground is Sydney Motorsport Park, a track I must admit I haven't always loved, but it has really grown on me in the recent years, and I think the night racing is a big part of the reason why. It's a 3.9 kilometer course in an anti-clockwise direction with 11 turns, and I would say the risk rating around here is on the lower end. The lap gets underway with a very fast left-hander sweeper at turn 1 that feeds you up to an important overtaking location at turn 2. You immediately work your way through turn 3 off to the right and then down a hill into turn 4. Turn 5 approaches not long after, and we see plenty of track limits issues here, and then after a short straight you're at turn 6, a near enough 90-degree left-hander. Turn 7 is another sweeper, albeit on the slower end of things, and that feeds you straight into turn 8, which is a double apex right-hander. Turn 9 you more or less ignore, but turn 10 you hit the anchors, which feeds you directly into turn 11, which sends you back onto that big long front stretch. In terms of spots to watch, turn 1 I've already flagged as a very high-speed corner, and as a result we do see plenty of lap 1 incidents here, and also deeper into the race it's one of those corners where you really hold your breath if you see someone attempting an overtake. Turn 3 is my next spot to watch because we often see drivers try and muscle each other out onto the grass through here, and while most of the time they get away with it, it certainly raises tensions, and should it go wrong, there's actually a really awkwardly placed wall on the driver's left which can cause quite a bit of damage if someone finds themselves in it. Then my final spot to watch is turn 8, the double apex right-hander, which is easy to spot on TV because it's got a massive power pole in the middle of the corner, and this one shouldn't attract as much drama as it does. It's a reasonably slow corner, it's got tarmac runoff on the exit, but for whatever reason we just see lots of tension through this part of the track, and case in point was Shane Van Gisbergen and Will Brown having a bump and run controversy there just last year. Keeping the focus on 2024, the action gets underway with a single practice session on Friday evening. That one will go for 90 minutes. On Saturday we have qualifying at 2:50 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, followed by a top 10 shootout at sunset, and then of course the big night race getting underway at 7:35, and that one will go for 51 laps. On Sunday it's the same format more or less, just a little bit earlier in the day, qualifying followed by a top 10 shootout, and then the second race of the weekend will be equal in distance but a bit earlier in the day, which should see us racing from sunset and into the night. The weather is expected to be on the cooler side, as you'd expect from Sydney at this time of year, but it is expected to be dry on all 3 days. Let's jump into the key Supercars headlines, starting with Jess Dane, who has sold her shares in 888 Racing, or the Red Bull team as most of us know it. This is an important one because it marks the first time in a many year that the Dane family haven't held a portion of the ownership of that team, although Roland Dane clearly continues to be involved from an advisory perspective. On the track though, the dates for the New Zealand round in 2025 have been confirmed. That will take place between the 11th to the 13th of April. That's the first round date we've had locked in for next year, so we'll gradually start being able to piece together next year's calendar. Focusing on this year though, we have had the format for Tasmania announced, which will be the event after the forthcoming mid-year break, and unfortunately they're going to have another Sunday morning practice which they trialled in Perth earlier this year, and I know a lot of you weren't very much a fan of that, so fingers crossed that's something they will do away with next year. James Courtney has also been in the headlines today. He's essentially done a very early retirement announcement saying that he will hang up the helmet, at least on a full-time basis, at the end of his current contract. So that means we're going to see him on track for the remainder of this year and 2025, but after that he'll move and focus on his recently established real estate profession. And then finally, it's understood that the Supercars head honchos will be canvassing the teams this weekend in Sydney, trying to get support for some changes to the team's racing charter. That's essentially the contract between the teams and Supercars, and those changes, I'm sure there's lots of things to be discussed, but they're mainly going to center on changing the arrangements that will allow Supercars to host more events in 2025. So fingers crossed for us fans that goes well. In terms of Gen3 Watch, there's some really exciting stuff and improvements in the pipeline for these generation of Supercars. Supercars. Firstly, Tickford are on the verge of finalising a new steering rack to be adopted from 2025 onwards, and my understanding is that all teams will be required to use it by the start of the 2026 season. Fingers crossed that helps with some of the weaknesses we've seen in the steering rack since Gen 3 was introduced. And the other aspect of Gen 3 which is being actively worked on is the tyres. Dunlop, as we covered recently, have a new compound they're proposing for next year, and this weekend it will see some extensive testing. Cameron Waters, Richie Stanaway, Brody Kostecki and Andre Heimgartner will have 30 minutes to themselves on the new compound, and fingers crossed that validates it as a better option than what we currently have. And then finally, the big one after the wind tunnel box was checked, all attention turned towards the engines, and the AVL dyno testing is scheduled to start up in the coming weeks. Supercars have personnel on their way to America at this very moment, and the engines are over there as well, getting hooked up for some engine testing. The goal of that one, of course, is to paritize the engines, or at least confirm they're equal before the big race this year, of course, Bathurst, taking place in October, and fingers crossed they can put that final element of parity to bed soon. In terms of the storylines this weekend, of course, it's the return of night racing, a format which has proven tricky to get right in Sydney, but I do think it's in a fairly good spot this year. We of course have the proper night race on the Saturday night, but on Sunday, which was the pain point last year, I do think things are a bit stronger. They won't have a full night race. It will start in the sunset and finish under lights, a bit like Abu Dhabi does in F1, but the race is of equal length at least, which I feel is important. I think the Sunday race always needs to have equal, if not greater status than the Saturday event, and I feel like they've taken a step towards that this weekend. There'll be an extra driver on track as well, with Lockie Dalton making his debut in a Tickford Wildcard. Always great to see extra cars on track, and as we saw from Cooper Murray earlier this year, there's plenty of talent in the wings, so fingers crossed he has a strong showing this weekend. Red Bull, of course, will be in the spotlight. They had a bit of a wobble, a rare wobble in Townsville, and while they have a fairly convincing lead in the championship, they'll be certainly looking to bounce back this weekend. And that brings me to my final storyline, which is the importance, the psychological importance of this weekend, because there's a big mid-season break coming up. Supercars takes a pause not to clash with the Olympics, and as a result, I think how the weekend goes for the key championship contenders in Sydney is going to play on their mind for a whole month. You know, if Red Bull don't manage to refine their form, that's going to raise some concerns about their trajectory in the back half of the year. Equally, I think if Mostert and Waters can have a good weekend, it should hopefully set them up that they can finally get some momentum going and perhaps even challenge for that championship after all. No matter what happens, drivers are going to have a whole month or so to stew on the results of this weekend, so I'm sure they're all going to be seeking a good result. Let's get into some predictions. I'm just going to fly through these today. I'm actually really struggling to get through this video. First one is a podium for Dick Johnson Racing. Honestly, not too much logic here, just a gut feeling, and fingers crossed they can get a good result. I'm also predicting a podium for Erebus. This one is based on the fact they did have a very good round here last year. However, a lot's happened since then, as we all know, but they have started showing glimmers of that hope and pace again, so they might string it together with a podium. And then my final prediction, more just shooting the breeze here, but I'm predicting a crash at turn 3, whether it's drivers interlocking wheels on lap 1 and putting themselves in the wall, or some sort of botched overtake. I think we could see some action at the top of the hill this weekend. Thank you as always to those of you who submitted your predictions. We had lots of comments this week, which was always great to see. First one here from Nutty, he's predicting that Triple Eight will regain their form, and it wouldn't surprise me, that team, when they do have their rare wobbles, they do tend to bounce back quite quickly. The second prediction here from FPR saying we could see a low attendance, to be honest. The weather doesn't look very warm, especially considering it's a night race. Should have been the first round, in my opinion. And yeah, I think this is a very fair assessment. The atmosphere and the crowd numbers, at least on TV last year, looked really, really strong despite being held again in the cooler months, but the introduction of Gen 3 may have bolstered those numbers. So this weekend will be an interesting one to see what the crowd figures are like. And yeah, I would certainly agree. being night and being Sydney, this one really does make sense to host more in the warmer months at the start of the year. And then the final prediction here from George, saying the Mustangs struggled last year on the long front straight, and top speed is still the Mustangs' Achilles heel. And yeah, an interesting comment here. Lots of talk about the performance of the Mustang, especially after Darwin and a equally long straight there. However, compared to last year at SMP, a lot has changed with the cars aerodynamically, which of course does impact the top speed as well, and they don't seem to be playing with the shift cuts as much this year either. So I wouldn't write the Mustangs off right away. However, as I said earlier, it will still be good to get that dyno testing done so we can have all confidence that everyone has the ability to win. Speaking of winning, it's Red Bull who are doing exactly that, both in the drivers and team standings. Will Brown does lead the way after a fairly rough Townsville though by his high standards. Brock Feeney's closed up a bit there in second, but Chaz Mostert is getting a bit of a charge now, followed by Cam Waters and Matthew Payne. On the team side, Red Bull definitely have that one locked down, followed by WAU, Tickford, Penrite and Shell V-Power Racing Team. Now we've got lots of support categories this weekend as well, some really good variety. My guilty pleasure, which I'm very much looking forward to after a rough week, is the V8 Super Utes. I can't wait to see them around SMP again. Porsche Carrera Cup are on track as well, as are the Toyota 86s, just their second round of this year's championship. Touring Car Masters will be on track as well, and sports sedans. But with that, my round review is at a close. Thank you for sticking with me in one of my less upbeat videos here on the channel, but I'm hoping I'm feeling better next week and able to talk about all the action we'll hopefully see on track this weekend. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. We're creeping up on 2,000 subs, which will be awesome to hit in the coming weeks. But until then, treat people like your trackside down there in the comments section, and I will see you in the next one.